Today, I really wanted to talk about the yin and yang because of this post that I saw on Discord. Can opposites exist together in a complementary manner, or are they inherently contradictory of each other? To be honest, I believe that they exist in a complementary way. We cannot have happiness without sadness, we cannot have joy without suffering, we cannot have heat without cold. And the reason why I want to talk about it is because I think concepts like the yin and yang are ultimately bullshit. And when I say bullshit, I mean that they are not accurately describing reality, or at least they're not like the best explanations we have for reality, or are not using tools that are appropriate to describe reality. So to understand why I think that, we need to start with a personal story. So 5 to 6 months ago, I did an IQ test, a professional IQ test. And in one of those tests was a vocabulary test where the administrator gave me words and I had to give out synonyms, the closest synonyms to that word. So for example, let's say I said the word real, you would need to say a synonym that is very close to that word, let's say genuine. But for me, I didn't have any multiple choice options. So eventually, at the end of the test, he said the word diatribe. And at that time, I didn't really know what that meant. So we ended the test, I went back home, and I researched it. What does diatribe mean? And it means a forceful and bitter verbal attack against someone or something. And so I learned that word, that was it. But for the following weeks, I started noticing that people use the word diatribe way more often than in the past. And it was as if everyone just started using it as soon as I learned it. Obviously, this didn't really happen. People didn't change their behavior just because I learned a new word. What was happening instead was what's called a frequency illusion, or the Bader-Meinhof phenomenon. It's when something that is new to us seems to occur much more frequently. So one area where this happens is when you learn a new word, but it can also happen in many other areas. So for example, if you decide to get pregnant, you might start seeing other people who are pregnant and other small children. And the reason why this effect or this illusion is happening is because of selective attention. At least this is the main cause of it. And selective attention happens because your brain, when you're living life, you're being bombarded by inputs from everywhere. And your brain, to stay sane, it needs to filter out the non-important information. So for example, if I show you this little book, the back of this book right here, and you start reading it, being able to recollect every single word is not really useful. To be able to just get the meaning out of it is the most useful part. And so your brain will filter out all of the non-necessary information so that your short-term memory will function as effectively as possible. And this is what happened, where the word diatribe to me in the past didn't have any reason to be focused on, because it's not really a word that is used often. And if you in a text don't understand just this one word, you won't miss a lot of the meaning. But then, because of an important event that made me learn that word, my brain started to focus on it. And the same effect is why, for example, when you buy a new car, you might start noticing the model of your car way more often on the road. So let's say you buy a new car like this Mercedes, this primes your brain, and then you will selectively put your attention on this model of car, and this will result in you seeing your car way more often on the street, and this will act as a kind of confirmation bias, and ultimately you'll try to explain why this is happening. So you might say, maybe when I bought it at the time, it became more popular and that's why I'm seeing it way more often. Or maybe it's just that people started driving, or there's something happening there, so you'll start to explain it. And those explanations are why I don't like theories or concepts like the yin and yang, because I think they are subject to the same kind of effects that makes the theory that, people just suddenly started to drive that car wrong. We as humans are really curious, and so we'll try to find explanations for every unknowns in the world because we're trying to cope with reality. Reality is really difficult, and sometimes you might suffer and you might ask yourself, why am I suffering? Why did my small child died? Why is there rain? Why are there hurricanes or storms? Why is the ground shaking right now? So we're trying to find ways to cope with reality by giving out explanations of why things happen. And for the yin and yang, this is the explanation that they came up with. So they said, in Chinese cosmology, the universe creates itself out of a primary chaos of material energy organized into the cycles of yin and yang, form and matter. Yin is retractive, passive, and contractive in nature, while yang is repelling, active, and expansive in principle. This dichotomy in some form is seen in all things in nature, patterns of change and difference. So this was the explanation that they came up with. Now, at the time when they came up with that explanation, it might have been good enough to cope with reality, to understand why things are happening. But now we have better tools to create better explanations as to why things happen. And I'm not saying that concepts like the yin and yang have no value. They probably have some value. For example, here, if we go say at the end, we should focus on balancing these opposites in our lives rather than trying to chase one side and completely avoid the other. This is probably very good life advice, but when you're trying to figure out what is true, explanations like these are not enough. Same thing for meditation, where meditation has shown that it's very effective, it's something beneficial for you to meditate once in a while or to meditate every day. But since it's been done for thousands of years, people have come up with explanations as to why those benefits happen. Why is it good for you to meditate? So in the Taoist tradition, they said that the reason why meditation was good is because it lets you let go of all kinds of intentional and reactive patterns and come to rest in oneness with spirit and is ready to merge completely with Tao. And in the Hindu tradition, they said that there are individuals who by meditation and yoga have realized their innate power of self, powers that were revealed by their own gunas, innate personality, and psychological attributes. Therefore, it is the power of the divine self within each individual that presides over all the primal causes, including time and self. So these were the explanations that different cultures gave as to why meditation was good. And although these explanations have value, I don't think they are good enough. And the reason why I don't think they're good enough is because there are some downsides today in believing in those explanations. So for example, if we go back here, we cannot have happiness without sadness. Well, what is the reason for that? Is it because there's something called the yin and yang that is making it impossible to have happiness without sadness? Or is it because of other explanations? I would say that the reason why this is happening is because being happy all the time is not really useful for survival, and being sad all the time is not useful for survival. And so a balance of the two is the best bet you have for making a creature more likely to survive, because it gives you the drive to do something with a reward that is happiness, but it also contrasts it with what happens when you don't have that drive to do something. Now, this is still a story that I'm telling myself, but the reason why I prefer this story to another one, the yin and yang, for example, is because there is more evidence on the side of my story than there is on the side of the yin and yang. Natural selection is something that we can observe, and so applying natural selection to the question to why are we happy sometimes and why are we sad sometimes is probably your best bet. Now, if we move on to the next thing that this person said, we cannot have heat without cold. This is the main problem with those explanations, is where you start creating patterns when those patterns don't really exist. And the reason why I say those patterns don't exist is because cold doesn't really exist. It's not something that's out there. Cold is just the lack of heat. So heat is something that we can observe. It's the vibration of atoms, I think. But coldness is just the absence of that. So saying that cold is the opposite of heat makes sense to us as humans, because we feel cold and we feel heat, and those are the terms we apply to those feelings. But in a more objective sense, saying that cold is the opposite of heat would be like saying that the opposite of a human is no human at all. It wouldn't make really much sense. So basically what I'm trying to say in this video is that we are suckers for cheap explanation and explanations that are personal to us. And this is described in the Barnum effect, where, for example, if I say, I see you sometimes judge yourself. This can apply to everyone, but you feel it's really personal to yourself. And it's when giving a high personal meaning to statements that apply to many. Another statement might be, at times you doubt you made the right choices. This also applies to pretty much everyone, but you feel it's really connecting to you, and that's why like psychics use the Barnum effect to really get you to trust them. And so you should really be careful when using personal experiences or the way you perceive reality to come up with explanations, because ultimately the way you perceive reality is not that objective at all. You are subject to the two effects that I talked about in this video, the frequency illusion and the Barnum effect. And so when you're trying to come up with an explanation or figure out which explanation is the best, you should always prioritize evidence that comes from the scientific method rather than prioritize your experience of reality, because as we've seen, it's not that objective. Now, let me know what you think about all of this, and let me know if you have any disagreements in the comments down below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.